Hello and welcome to the Broadrun Podcast, episode number 28. I'm here with Dorian. How are you doing, Dorian?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you for having me on.
No worries. We're here to talk all things endurance, slightly left field from your typical running podcast today, but we're going to talk about something interesting. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about the endurance feat that you have just completed?
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, I went to Taiwan for an event called BikingMan. BikingMan brands itself as the World Championship of ultra distance cycling, and so they have events throughout the year. I think starting from March all the way through November, with Taiwan being the last one. And I just did one, and it's all the same format. So every race is 1,000 kilometers or a bit more, as was the case for me, and around 20,000 meters of elevation with a time cap of 5 days. The Taiwan one specifically was meant to be 1,200 kilometers and 20,000 meters of elevation, but because there was a huge typhoon, like 2 days before the race, some of the mountain roads closed. So it was 1,150 kilometers and I think 17,000 meters of elevation.
So you had it
Yeah,
easy then?
I had it easy. I
Yeah.
had it easy. Yeah.
Sounds like a bit of an epic challenge. So I like first of all to flesh out Dorian the man. Like tell me a bit about yourself. Like what do you do? Like what is it you've got a really interesting story behind I always tell people about like your bucket list of races and different things that you've done in the past. So like tell us a bit about like
Yeah. So, how I got into cycling is when I moved to London from Singapore, which is where I went to high school. I wanted to get a student job, but not a boring one. So I started working for Deliveroo on my like 1970s rally bike. And throughout my shifts, I ended up covering like 50, 60 kilometers of like pure adrenaline, cycling, just racing through cars, trying to deliver as fast as possible. Really liked it. So got into cycling that way. So that's on the cycling side. And on the endurance side, I just grew up watching like YouTube videos of ridiculous challenges, whether it be, walking across Australia or like Ironman World Championships in the 2000s or ultra distance
Mhm.
trail running. And this was, when I was like 12, 13. So
Yeah, yeah.
before it was as popular as it is now, which made it all the more inaccessible to me. So like I looked up to them as like absolute, you know,
Yeah, gods.
immortals.
Yeah.
And as I slowly started progressing through cycling, doing like half Ironman and then what they call like an extreme triathlon in the Alps, um, I was like, this is starting to become more and more achievable. And then I stumbled on Biking Man very randomly. I was on holiday in Corsica with my family. I had brought my bike because I was living in London still at the time, and just bumped into some cyclists on the road that had like bibs, wearing bibs as if they were wearing musettes, drying their second pair of bibs. I was like, "What's going on, guys?" Like, "Oh, we're doing this event, cycling around the island. It's 1,000 kilometers, etc." Just planted a seed, and 2 years later, I signed up. So
Absolutely epic. That's absolutely class. So like obviously you
yeah,
mentioned there, so you did a triathlon, Alpe d'Huez triathlon, correct?
yeah, I did the Alpe d'Huez triathlon, which is a long distance triathlon, although it's more like slightly more than a half Ironman. But
Yeah.
the specialty there is the swim was 2.2, the cycle was 120, and the run was 20 kilometers.
Uh-huh.
But what it's known for is the cycle has 3,600 meters of elevation.
So just a bit then.
Just a bit, yeah.
Yeah,
Just enough to enjoy it.
a bit different to the typical perhaps most of the people who listen to this are from the Middle East, so they do
Yeah.
70.3 Bahrain, they do 70.3 Muscat, which has got some climbing. They do maybe T100 Dubai last week, which had, I think it had about 7 meters of climbing in the 80 kilometers. I'm not sure. Will you ever ask someone who does cycling here? All anybody cares about is average speed because they've never cycled, or maybe they have, but they have no relation to like cycling for elevation or cycling for anything. So all anybody cares about is what was your average speed. I don't know if you found that. when you come here?
Well, yeah, for sure. So when I moved from London to Dubai, I was looking for cycling events when I was bored and at work before moving, and I found the Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
And when you sign up to all these cycling races here, they have you choose pace groups.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
slowest pace group was 27 kilometers per hour, and I was like, that sounds fast, but I know I'm not the slowest.
Yeah.
So I signed up to the second slowest, which was advertised at 32 kilometers per hour,
Yeah.
and that seemed like inconceivable over a 170 kilometer cycle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And actually, it was very achievable.
Yeah,
But
well, once you're in the group, like we did this spinny cycle challenge race at the weekend, and like we had to start at the back because we're unranked, and like you realize cycling in a group at 30 kilometers an hour is like absolutely, it's an
you're
absolute
freewheeling.
joke. You're
Yeah,
freewheeling, you're pedaling probably every 20 seconds, but then you go from like cycling in London, which would be very similar to cycling in Scotland, like most of my rides would be average 18 to 21 kilometers an hour. So I was the
yeah,
same when I first came out here and I seen people averaging 30 kilometers around the loop. I thought, what's going on here? Like this is absolutely crazy. But yeah. Anyway, I don't want to labor too much on cycling around the loop. It's obviously not the most interesting thing, but obviously back to BikingMan Taiwan. So like how does one begin to prepare for a 1200 kilometer cycle race with that, level of elevation? How do you sort of, I mean, you've obviously talked to me personally about your training plan. So how did you sort of go and physically and mentally prepare for the race?
yeah. So I up until very recently, I have never been coached, um, and I actually very much enjoy the idea of going into it blind and figuring out myself and learning from that, which is how I, have gotten better at cycling over the years. And so I just had an idea in mind of, well, I'll just cycle as much as I can every week. At the start of the process of starting to train for Biking Man, I went to get a bike fit, focused on comfort, and I mentioned why I was getting the bike fit to the bike fitter. And he just said, out of the blue, he's like, oh, for that event, you must be training at least 15 hours a week. So then I just took that and anchored on it. And I just designed the plan to train around 15 hours a week.
Uh-huh.
And also used it as an opportunity to tick off a few things on my bucket list. Now, they're not the most exciting. So one of them was I wanted to do Alpe de Zwift twice in one session. So I scheduled that in there. I wanted to do Jebel Jais in the UAE twice. And also 3 times, so I scheduled those in there. I had seen a cycling group here called the UAE Randonneurs. Last year they did 500 kilometers in Al Qudra, so I cycled that into the calendar. Ended up stepping it down to 400 kilometers, still my longest ride. So it helped with motivation that almost every weekend or every other weekend, I had challenges that I would have wanted to do anyways, regardless of Biking Man, to train for it.
That's yeah, that's epic. I remember you doing that overnight cycle, the long training ride you did. It's just absolutely, probably for most people that's completely inconceivable. Like of being able to do that in that one session. It's absolutely amazing to see. And would you say that like not to be too David Goggins, but like calloused your mind to be like, right, well, I did that thing and it sucked going around Kudra. Just you, it was you and one other bloke, right?
Yeah, the one guy I was supposed to. It was why basically the guy I was supposed to go to Taiwan with. So we had signed up as a pair.
Yeah.
So we were doing all the training together.
Hmm.
Did it callous my mind? I would say in a way, but it's more objective and a more rational thought process than just like it hardened me.
Hmm.
When you hear endurance athletes, or when I listen to interviews of endurance athletes, they all talk about this bank. It's what you have in the bank, and the bank is previous experiences you've gone through. So that's how you work yourself up incrementally. Like if you struggled to reach a 10K, the next time you aim for a 12K, you know that at least you have the 10K in the bank.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's from that perspective, first of all. What was more important, I think, is like the small experiences of, for example, cycling through the night. People, all the videos I've watched of ultra distance cycling, they always say it's really hard to get when you go into the night.
Hmm.
It's hard the hour before the sunrise. And actually, my experience was completely different. Like the night was
Right?
by far the easiest part,
Really?
and by far the hardest was after the sunrise. And that was the case in Taiwan as well. Like at the end of the afternoon, I was just looking forward to nightfall because it's just so much easier mentally for me. And
Really?
that is
That's
something I needed
interesting.
to learn. And then there was like other learnings about, food and
How did like the Taiwanese people, like how did they sort of did you come across a lot
yeah.
of the locals, and how was that, and like how was the experience? Obviously, you even like you mentioned food there, so what was the
So a few bits to unpack. So the Taiwanese people are super welcoming, and they're also very well traveled.
really?
And so there's, in your mind, you're cycling through small villages in a small country off the coast of China in the remote areas of that country. And actually, you walk into a 7-Eleven in one of these small villages and you stumble across a guy that had unicycled 20 kilometers that morning and had cycled across France and Britain. And he
Really?
lived in that small village. He was a Taiwanese guy.
Uh-huh.
And that experience happened so much. Like, oh, you're French. I've been to France like 3 times.
Uh,
So that's in terms of the Taiwanese people, very receptive, very accommodating, very happy. So that's great.
mm-hmm.
And it's part of the event as well. Like you're doing this stuff for the adventure. And for the food,
Mm-hmm.
I could speak on my behalf and on behalf of the other 49 participants. We did all our meals at 7-Eleven because there's 7-Elevens everywhere across the country. And when you're cycling that much, you're like 5 meals a day. And it's
Yeah.
basically sugary soy milk, a lot of candy bars, a few pots of instant noodles in the evening, and I think what the most important thing for everyone was onigiri and sushi rolls. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just have that in your back pocket and you're eating all the time.
That was interesting. Obviously, that was my next question in terms of like not just food, but like nutrition. Were you taking on any sports nutrition, or was it effectively all food?
Yeah. So I had gone in with the ambition of using gels in addition to electrolyte tablets and recovery powder. And when I spoke to everyone that had a lot more experience than me, they were like, you're not going to use gels. Like, don't pack 40 gels. Because you have to remember, this is a self-supported race, which I
Yes.
hadn't mentioned. So you have to carry everything with you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have anyone give you anything that was
Mm-hmm.
planned. You can buy stuff. But that means if you want gels, you have to carry them up the 17,000 meters of elevation.
Mm-hmm.
So what I ended up doing was I had Science and Sport electrolyte tablets. I had Science and Sport recovery powder.
Mm-hmm.
I had one scoop around 1 p.m. and one scoop after I finished, which was around 9 p.m. every day. And I also had 1 or 2 gels a day. But most of the nutrition was from 7.
Fair enough. Shout out 7-Eleven if they are
Yeah,
looking
shout out
to
7-Eleven.
sponsor a podcast. I'm sure this would be a great place to start.
Yeah.
Actually, that's one thing like you miss like things like 7-Eleven here, right? Like
Yeah, no, it's
so convenient in like loads of different places around the world. It's just like a handy
yeah, no,
place to go and
ADNOC
pick.
does not come close to 7-Eleven.
It doesn't. But I mean, just be careful what you say about ADNOC. Yeah, they might come for us. Picari Sweat, it does go a long way.
No, I had Pocari Sweat all over Taiwan. That was definitely one of the key things, actually.
Yeah,
Can't
so I
recommend
mean,
it
I think
enough.
it's that's originally like a Asian-based drink, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, so obviously really good. So shout out Bakari Sweat. That's somebody who we would take on as a sponsor, like jokes aside. Like, so if you're
Yeah,
listening to this and you know somebody in Bakari Sweat. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your bike. Like, I want you to just talk me through your bike, your equipment. I've seen bike packing stuff. I've seen all that, how did you manage to sort of sort that out with your gear? What tires did you ride? Did you have a plan for punctures? Did you get any punctures?
yeah. Okay, so my bike is a Canyon Endurace CFSL 7, I think. So it has Tegra. Um, it's an XXL frame, so that's 64 centimeters. I upgraded the wheels on it to, I think, like 48 millimeter Hunt wheels from the UK, which is the main upgrade. I had to get a longer seat post as well. But
That's
everything
because
else is
you're how tall?
2 meters. And
Yeah.
of those 2 meters, a lot of it is legs. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
my
Yeah.
bike fitter basically said like, come back when you have a longer seat post. There's nothing I can do for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Which is the guy at Bike Hero, actually.
Yeah. Shout out Banny.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
And in terms of,
you've got your equipment attached on, so you have like
yeah,
saddlebags, etc.
yeah,
What sort of that
exactly.
entail?
So I had a 10-liter saddlebag where I had all my clothes as well
Hmm.
as like things I wasn't going to use throughout the day. So spare inner tubes, pharmacy kit, survival blanket, which was mandatory equipment, and my wind jacket. And then I had a frame bag, 5 liters, which is by far the most useful bike bag you can buy. If anyone has to buy a bike bag, it should be a frame bag. And there I had all my nutrition, including my gels, recovery powder. I had ice spray as well because I was doing this with bursitis on my left knee, so I had to ice my knee very often. I had muscle tape.
Hmm.
I had my bike tools as well. And then I had a top tube bag, which was 1 liter that I bought in Taiwan, and that was just for my GoPro, my phone, and my spare battery. And
Very
no
cool.
handlebar bag for 2 reasons. One, it's clunky on the bike, and two, most importantly, it makes your bike more unstable in descents
Hmm.
or when you want to ride without your hands, which is important for your back recovery. So
Yeah.
no handlebar bag.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I bet you
Yeah.
really want to stretch your back out. Obviously, I must say that I did see you coming out of the chiropractor the other day, so the back's obviously not in the best condition.
No.
But yeah, so that's no, that's definitely definitely interesting. Having to do that self-supported, I think a lot of people would struggle for that, for regular bike stuff. But if you were to say like, imagine I'm fresh off the street and I want to take in ultra endurance cycling, is there any sort of key points you would tell me? What have you learned from that? Like, is there anything that you'd wish you'd known before you started?
I don't think I learned anything that I didn't know, but I just appreciated some dynamics more. So I would say, most importantly, it's not a race in the sense that your mindset should not be focused on going as fast as possible, but rather minimizing your breaks. Like the people that won, so I did it in 4 days. The people that won did it in 3 days. They won because they slept the least and took the shortest breaks. And I
Wow.
slept probably the most and took some of the longest breaks.
So how long did you
Um,
sleep typically?
so I slept 4 hours a night for 3 nights. So that's 12 hours over my 90-hour completion time. But in addition to that, I stretched like 1 hour a day. I took 1 hour breaks for most of my meals. I had to wash my bibs a lot of the time to wash salt out, for skin maintenance.
Yeah, yeah.
But back to your original question on what I learned is just go at your pace and enjoy the experience, and the self-supported nature of these races have a dynamic that you really can't find anywhere, which is you're not looking you don't have a deadline. Like if you're going out on a Sunday cycle,
Hmm.
maybe you have to go get back for 2 p.m. because you have a brunch,
Hmm.
or you have to go for pints, or you have an appointment at your doctor's, etc. Even if you're doing a super long training ride, you have to be back in bed because you have to wake up for work, etc.
Hmm.
And actually on these races, like, it's completely up to you. And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
makes it a lot more enjoyable and a lot
Hmm.
more bearable.
Yeah, there's almost like a freedom to that, isn't there?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, you weren't logging on, you didn't have to log on, your boss wasn't telling you when something was
Exactly.
due. You were sort of, I mean, it was just you and the bike, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, it must be freeing. Um,
It really, really is. Because, like, also, because it's a 1,000-kilometer course and there were 50 people, you rarely come across anyone, which means
yeah,
you're not chasing anyone. You're really going at your own pace. And actually, when you're going at your own pace, you're not thinking about it. It's not like a flat 70.3
hmm,
where you're constantly thinking, if I slow down, I'm not going to meet my average speed.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, you don't have that at all on your mind. And it's really nice.
That is nice. Yeah, sometimes it's good to throw away the stats and just enjoy something. I think sometimes in the endurance world we lose sight of that, right? We're sort of constantly comparing ourselves to other people and different things like that. Whereas you're there for the experience, you're taking it all in. It's a different thing altogether, right?
Yeah, and actually, I can take some credit for not going stat based, but I also have to give credit where credit is due, which is both my heart monitor and my power sensor decided to not work at the beginning of the race. So for the whole race, I didn't have my heart rate or my power, which really allowed me to free myself and just enjoy the
Go by
experience.
feel.
Exactly.
I really like that. I like that. Sometimes you got to throw away the technology. I've recently
Yeah.
started doing that myself with for the longest time, especially when I was coaching people, I was big on people make sure you've got a heart rate monitor. To be honest, I reckon for most of the time you could throw it all in the bin. I mean, it's probably not what the companies want you to hear, but I mean, you could. It's nice to have the data afterwards, but like it's good to think about how you feel. And if you're cycling at an unsustainable pace and you know you've got to go for 1,000 kilometers, your body's very quick to tell you, wait a minute, we can't hold this for the whole time, you know?
Yeah.
And you know yourself, it's almost like an internal, I think they actually call it uh, what do they call it? I've completely gone blank on the phrase. Anyway, I'll come back. But basically, like your internal body's computer of telling you, right, we're essential governor theory.
Your
That's what
circadian
said.
rhythm.
No, essential governor theory. It's called. Where like,
All right.
if you were to go out and set out on a 10 mile run, regardless if you had a watch or not, most people would be able to tell like like a scientist, is this pace sustainable for the full time or is it not? And it's like central governor theory, which is like I quite like it. Sometimes it's good to listen to your own body, and pretty much most of the old school athletes would do that. Before SRMs and before all that stuff, they would just pace to feel, and it's quite cool. So would you do it again? That's the big question that everyone's asking. Would you go back and go again?
It depends what the objective is. If I wanted to get a better result, I would go for a shorter distance. So they have a format which is 600 kilometers. The reason for that is I could see myself not sleeping for a 600-kilometer race because I could do that in 2 days. I don't see myself not sleeping for 4 days. So I would also, so that's if I wanted to get a better result, but I'm probably more attracted by just going for a longer distance, whether it's the race across France or like the race across America, which probably will come later down the line in a few years, hopefully. But yeah, they have races that are like 2,000, 3,000 kilometers.
Yeah. So go
For
for
sure.
something else, I suppose. Yeah, you don't want to go. You've done that thing and like on to the next one.
Yeah.
That's good. So that's obviously goes into my next question. What's next on your cycling bucket list adventure? So it sounds like the race across America sounds like one that you're really keeping your eye on for the future.
Yeah. So there's lots on the bucket list.
Mm-hmm.
Dream big. I don't know if you know about the Enduro Man. It's called the Arch to Arch Triathlon.
I don't. I'd love to hear about it.
It's basically, so I'm not saying this is next because this is insane and only 50 people have completed it. You basically run from Marble Arch in London to Dover. You then swim the English Channel
Mm.
and then you cycle to Paris. So I think that's probably the holy grail in terms of like ultra distance events.
Yeah.
In terms of what's next, it's probably like more normal things. Like I'm doing a big trail race in January in the UAE, which is good. And I highly recommend to anyone and everyone to start trail running in the UAE.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully a half Ironman. Yeah, no events in particular.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds like obviously it's good to have a little break after a challenge, and then sounds like we've got a couple of things to work towards post. Well, now, basically starting from now to start training towards. So it's
Yeah,
super good, but been really interesting to hear, especially about this, because there'll be a lot of people who have never considered this kind of challenge, and maybe it's something they want to take on as something different. Especially as most people think about challenges as like pure performance. I want to run a 40-minute 10K. I want to cycle, hold a 30-kilometer average for 80 kilometers, whatever it might be. Sometimes it's good to do a different type of challenge. Challenge doesn't always mean go fast. It can mean, you know, lots of different
go
things. But
further.
go further,
As
yeah.
Dylan said on a previous episode. Yeah, the I think the biggest selling point, and it's what I was looking for, is like I definitely found new limits mentally on that race, and it wasn't enjoyable
Yeah.
in that moment, but like in hindsight, it's probably one of the most intense moments of my life. and I definitely grew from it. And if I go back to the bank I was mentioning earlier, I now have a lot more in the bank thanks to that experience, and
What
it's
was
useful not just in sport, you know.
what was your lowest point of the race?
Definitely the end.
Really?
If you think about it, it's 1100 kilometers. This distance keeps changing throughout this call. To be precise, it's 1147, but I keep rounding it in different ways.
Yeah.
The first thousand, amazing. You're discovering a new country. The scenery is great. Every time you're working towards something, whether it's like a bamboo forest or a Wuling Pass, which is 3,200 meters of elevation, it's like all these amazing feats that you're finding yourself completing. And then the last 150 kilometers were headwind at night, in the rain, when you're absolutely cooked. You have
Uh-huh.
nothing left to earn, right?
Yeah.
Like you just have to get home. And that was 8 hours of brutality.
Yeah.
And I reached the end and I had absolutely nothing left emotionally. Like I was
Were
just
there tears, or was it gone past tears?
no, there were no tears. No, there were like the race organizer described it as like I was shell shocked. Like it honestly felt like I was coming back from war. Not that I
Really?
would know what that experience is, but
Yeah, but metaphorically.
yeah, like I was shell shocked. I had nothing left, and actually that lasted a few days.
Hmm.
It took a while to appreciate the experience in hindsight. I definitely do, and that's what I mean by I found new limits. Like I really emptied the emotional tank.
That's very interesting. That's
No,
very cool to listen to. I like the perspective of what you're saying. You said it earlier, but you touched on it again there, just about like when you reach new heights, it makes like I like to say to people like when you go to like the top of one mountain, it makes another one seem small. Like the next challenge, it's like in running when someone does a 21, all of a sudden a 10 is like a cakewalk. Your brain almost rewires to what your new hard is, right? And like you've rewired a new hard. Like if your boss asks you to stay awake and make a PowerPoint presentation to deliver to people, I mean, you'll be like, well, I've battled in wind and rain in Taiwan for 1,000 kilometers. Like I can make a little PowerPoint presentation, you know. And that's why I think like endurance sports is like it's one of the best metaphors for life, right? It's like it gets you through and makes other things seem not as hard when you do these hard challenges. So yeah, yeah, yes, yeah, no, 100%. I think people I've come across some people who will sort of try and put the next challenge before the first challenge, where they try and see the bigger peak before they've climbed, you know, to use your analogy, climbed to sort of the first one. They try and say, right, I'm going to go and do a full Ironman. They've never done a triathlon before. Like, why well, there's always want to go and try and do this big thing. And I wonder if that's the sort of the whole social media thing where it just like corrupts people's mind. People have seen you do this, and instead of taking the first step and doing something small, they try and go and do the big thing. Like these challenges need to be almost earned, don't they? Where they're like, you probably couldn't have done that unless you'd done these other hard things before. Yeah, yeah, yeah. One day. Well, maybe one day. But yeah, that sounds like it's been really great chatting with you and getting everything about the sort of the ultra cycle in Taiwan and just like chatting to you more. And hopefully we can get you back on and talk about some of your next challenges which you mentioned. I like your shout out for trail running in the UAE. There's loads of good groups and stuff going out here. So yeah, it's absolutely awesome to have you on. I appreciate you taking 30 minutes out your day to chat with me. All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. See you on the next one.